So currently I'm sitting underneath a tree, and this tree would be called big-tooth aspen. Not to get confused with its neighbor, the quaking aspen, which is typically smaller and has finer tooth leaves, but we'll get into that here in a second. The big-tooth aspen also goes by the name Populus grandentata, big, grand, but it's part of the willow family, which makes you question some willows. But typically, this is the trunk. This is probably as big as it's gonna get, slightly bigger maybe. They usually only last around 40 years, which is not that long for a tree. But they do this cool thing which is called suckling. And what basically happens is you'll have this tree, and then it'll branch off, cause another tree like that. And so when you see one aspen, just assume when you see more, same tree. That's usually a good rule to play by. But as for the tree itself, since this is an older one, it's gonna have more grooves. Now, it's not like the tulip poplar, where, as Runkle put it, you can grab it and basically climb up like that. Well, yes, it has grooves and they look deep. They're not that deep. They're slightly furrowed, and you can still see some of the smoothness here from when I was younger, and it usually carries that throughout its life. But as for the leaves, here's two examples of the big-tooth aspen leaf. They don't have fine teeth. They're big-toothed. They're big-toothed aspen. Whereas quaking aspen would look a lot more fine. And typically the leaves can get greenish to yellow, and same thing with the bark. You gotta use your imagination. But when you look at it head on and the sun hits it just right, you can kind of see that yellowish green color. Now, when it's younger, the leaves are typically gonna have like a white / kind of fuzzy deal on the bottom. But they don't carry that through adulthood. And the big characteristic about aspen is the leaf stems are flat compared to an oak leaf, which would be round. And this makes it more like, I don't know how to describe it. When you see the tree, it looks like TV static. So when I move it like this, it's gonna do that, but an oak leaf is gonna stay stiff. I don't remember the exact reason, but it picks up wind better and it allows the sun to get to the understory a little bit better. But let's go take a look at the buds and a little closer look at the bark. So currently, as previously, I'm leaning on a mature aspen, and typically when they mature, they'll get these eye marks, and they have them in their youth too, and it's caused from epicormic branching when they just fall off. They're not really good at healing themselves, so they'll give themselves these scars. But as you can see, it's about the width of me in full maturity. And they usually get around 40 feet tall, around there, usually a little bit higher, but they don't get too much larger than that, and you'll see here in a minute, because they'll typically rot and fall over. But moving on to the buds and a closer look at the more smoothish bark. So currently, this is a big-tooth aspen that has fallen over, and whether it was due to it rotting while standing or wind knocking it over, it's rotting. But this is what it looks like when it has a smoother bark. And there's some other younger trees around here that have even smoother bark, like practically gray. But typically, when you're looking up into the canopy, it looks more white. It'll go from a gray to white, scaling almost. But really, you'll want to look out for the smoother bark, and sometimes with the furrows, like with the yellowish green color. And as for their site, you'll most likely see them in rich, loamy soils. But it's really just dependent upon the pH of the surrounding area. But you won't see them really in your floodplains or higher up on the ridge, unless that ridge, for some reason, has loamy soils. Now, as for the buds, they're usually larger, on the larger side. You can see there, they will have scales on them, almost resembling a pine cone of sorts, if the camera will focus, but they'll have scales in them, and it resembles a pine cone in my mind. But that's the big thing scales, and then their leaf scars will have, it's like 2 ovals next to them, and then like doo-doo-doo. But yeah, that was the big tooth aspen. And then there's some folklore behind it, but I don't remember it, if I'm gonna be honest. But yeah, this is my favorite tree, and I hope that you gain something from my presentation.